last week I was so focused on the Brady stuff and then the Shohei Ohtani stuff that I talked about that I didn't talk about, I think, another pretty big story that I don't know if it's under the radar necessarily. I mean, I'm a soccer guy, so obviously, these are the type of news stories that I think are important. So Panini and FIFA extended their licensing contract, which, I don't know if you're FIFA, I'm sure there has to be a lot of money involved, to be completely honest, because, as we've seen in the past, really with that organization, money talks with with them. So like, if I'm the thing with that contract, I'm wondering if Topps ever tried getting involved, because I'm wondering if they ever got involved, or if because they have the UEFA license that they wouldn't be able to have the UEFA and FIFA licenses because they're two different organizations. It's kind of like, I guess I'll make the comparison. It's like baseball. It's like having the baseball and the football. No, I guess it's not really like that. It's like, actually, I mean, honestly, there really isn't anything like those two different organizations and having the licensing for them. Because like I said, I was going to compare it to baseball and football, but it's like those are different sports, so it'd be a little bit different. So I'm wondering if, like, because I know the Topps, they've got like Champions League and stuff along those lines, and then they've got their individual licenses. And I think the interesting thing with FIFA, now that they are locked in, that probably means that I guess I'd be interested to know this license. Like, are we going to now get World Cup cards when that World Cup comes back around? And it does look like, I just quickly pulled up an article, and it looks like the agreement from the article that I'm reading, it says, under the new agreement, Panini will remain as FIFA's exclusive partner for the official stickers, trading card games, digital collectibles, and that's going to include the 2026 World Cup and the 2030 World Cup, and then also the 2027 Women's World Cup. So we are going to get Panini cards for this 2026 World Cup, which I think is probably one of the more, if you're a U.S. soccer fan, it's probably the most important. It's maybe the most important World Cup in the history of American soccer. I mean, I know that we've had good teams in the past, but we've kind of gone through a pretty big lull in like how well a team is doing. And I mean, the last World Cup was great because we saw kind of what these young players can do and a lot of their potential. But like 2026, it being in the United States, like this is, and then just based on kind of the generations of players throughout the other countries, like, by the 2026 World Cup, Messi's not going to be around, probably Cristiano Ronaldo probably won't be around. I think England, it's really probably going to be like England and the United States. Like, both of our generations of players that we have right now by that point in their careers are going to be in their like prime. Like, it's going to be like prime for them. Like, Pulisic, McKinney, like all of these players. Like, I don't know if by the 2030 World Cup we may be looking at like I'm trying to think of a comparison. We may be looking at like that 2016 World Cup with like, a lot of the players were kind of a little bit past their prime, like. And we saw I think it was 2016 and then 2012. Those ones were pretty important for the team. I don't think we had necessarily as good of a team back then as we are going to for that 2026 World Cup. But that means throughout, I'm wondering, that probably means like there's the Copa America that the United States, because the United States is having the World Cup here, we automatically qualify, which means they're looking for other tournaments basically to get into, big news. I think that was probably over the summer, and then we qualified for it, was the Copa America, all the North America, and I think all the North American teams were either in contention for Copa America or they qualified for Copa America. No, it must have been in contention, because I think we had to qualify for it, I'm pretty sure. So we're going to be playing teams like Brazil and Argentina, and I believe that's this upcoming summer in 2024. So that's a big deal. I mean, I don't know if we're going to see any other big, like, I can't imagine we're going to like go over to Europe to play in any type of tournament. I can't imagine that would be allowed, but we are going to get Euros too. I didn't see that on that list, but I would have to assume that the Euros are also going to be in that, which I believe the Euros are this upcoming summer as well in 2024. So, I am, in the process of following and kind of getting to know some of the newer players that may be rookies. I mean, I think 2018, 2019, I was really in tune with who the new rookies were, who the top upcoming players were. But then I started following more of the U.S. team and kind of following more of those players. So I wasn't, the international players, I'm not as in tune with who the rookies are, at least right now, because of what happened with the World Cup. And I was just so into what was going on with the United States and following the United States team. I wasn't really following those other players. But if you're Panini, this I think is a massive deal for Panini, because it's really probably one of their, after they lose football and basketball, FIFA could potentially be their biggest license. I mean, I think that I'm pretty sure that they still have the UFC and WWE, but like, FIFA is going to be their biggest license, which, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I believe FIFA, I don't think that the Champions League falls under FIFA. FIFA is all the international tournaments, but then also Panini owns a couple of the licensing rights for some of the leagues, but it's interesting. And this is kind of the weird thing about soccer and their licensing. Topps can come out with products that have these players that are on their club teams if it's a Champions League product. So, like, they can have Pulisic on AC Milan, which before it was Chelsea at the time. But so, like, it's very similar to at the time when Topps was making football and Panini was making football. There was a Topps card and then there was a Panini card. So there was a Prism Chelsea Pulisic card, but then there was also a Topps Chrome Pulisic card because it fell under UEFA, which was the Champions League, but it didn't fall under, which, like I said, the licensing is very confusing, but I think the FIFA licensing, I feel like, is pretty straightforward in terms of, like, it's basically you're just going to see the international national teams, which, again, it's an interesting debate within soccer, I think, and I don't know if necessarily it's been swayed one way or the other. I really think it comes down to which card it just comes out first sometimes, but like because it's actually one of the only sports that does this. It's the club sport versus the national team. Like, which card for soccer players is going to be more important? And like I said, I think it's still to be determined. I think we're still sort of seeing that. I think soccer definitely had a moment a couple years ago, and I think things have definitely slowed down a lot. I mean, it was one of those, like, secondary sports that, like, people were really starting to get into. It could have been also because of the World Cup. So, it may have another moment where when the World Cup comes around, and when the World Cup is in the United States especially, like, how much Panini advertising and stuff is going to happen within the United States, because within the United States, I mean, Canada and Mexico as well, but mostly within the United States, because Panini is obviously a United States-based company. They do have the stickers in Italy, which in overseas, which I think is also important. But within the United States, I do wonder if soccer is going to have another moment. I don't know. It is definitely it has fallen off maybe at the same rate as some of the other sports, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think the other sports and just in general, we've seen definitely a big fall off in terms of interest. So we're going to see maybe another cycle come around where it's like the World Cup is coming. You got Euros this summer. You've got a lot of, like I said, also a lot of the U.S. players are kind of some of the best players, or they're in that upper echelon of top players on their teams for their club teams. So maybe it comes back around, maybe it doesn't. But like I said, I definitely have said this over the summer. I think it's one of the most interesting sports in the world. Just the dynamics of everything, the national team, the club teams, and I also enjoy watching the game too. I know some people don't, but I think it's definitely something that you can look into if you want to get into a sport that you really don't have any knowledge of, and you want to really dive deep and get into the intricacies and the nuances of the sport. I think soccer, honestly, is the way to go. And again, like I said, it's one of the sports that I I don't know. I don't know if I was one of the first content creators to really get into soccer, but I know like I was definitely in the first couple creators that were starting to make soccer content within sports cards. Like in 2019, 2020, after I went to the National and I talked to Tyler from Gary V's team, and I was like, Mbappe, this is like the next guy, and he's like, oh yeah, this is the next guy. I bought like a ton of his cards, and I got a bunch of them graded. And during the peak, I was lucky enough that I sold a bunch of them. I wish I had kept a few of them, but like now I probably could buy some of them back because of the same way that it's happened with all of the other sports. Like you can buy back a lot of cards now. But I started learning more about the sports. I started making content about it, and it really, like I said, it had a moment, kind of fell off a little bit. But I think over the next few years, there's potential that we could see another surge in the interest in soccer and soccer cards. There could be more news, I think, on this topic in the next couple of days because it's still a developing story. It's something that broke yesterday, actually. It was, let's see, so Mario Alondrio, I believe, so baseball, so card blog. It's BEISOL card blog. They broke a story that is pretty wild. Like I think it was last week at some point or over the weekend, there was an eBay account that had something along the lines of like 20 different superfractors on like their eBay. They were selling them from this year's Bowman, from Bowman Draft. I don't remember if there were any like big huge names in there, but there were the product had just been out, so it didn't. The story immediately is like, what's going on here? How did this happen? Like, how does one eBay or one person selling on eBay have like all of these superfractors from the product that just came out like this past week? And so apparently the cards were stolen. They were they came from either a facility. They were not. They're not fakes. They're real cards or customs. And I'm just reading from the report here. So Mario talked to someone. They talked to the CEO of Fanatics because they had the info, and I believe Collectibles Guru also had some of the info. But Mario came out with the story first, so I'm reading off of some of the info that he's come out with. So they were incomplete superfractors that didn't pass the quality inspection during the lamination didn't pass quality inspection due to a lamination issue, and they were set aside to be destroyed, but they were stolen from the facility, which like it is, it's a decent amount of cards, but he said there's a limited amount of these cards, and collectors will not have to worry as none of the damaged or stolen cards made it into packs. They were also easily identifiable by serial numbering. What the serial numbering on the stamp was different was stamped on the back of the card instead of the front. Furthermore, all grading companies have been alerted by Fanatics. The CEO of Fanatics talked to Mario, and he said that everybody that purchased one of these cards from the person on eBay, they're going to be reimbursed by Fanatics. And it is a story that is still developing, and it is. I don't know. There's no way to really. I mean, I can't. This person has to go. This has to be like a criminal. It would be. I would imagine this has to be some sort of criminal offense. Like, which also, it's like how. I'm sorry. I know that you were selling damaged superfractors that were stolen from the top facility, but how stupid do you have to be to then sell them all at the same time on eBay? All at the same time. Not even going to shows and selling them. And I'm not giving criminals ideas of how to sell cards that were stolen, but it's like, how dumb do you have to be for this to happen? It almost makes me think that this was done... that this was like a sting or something. Like this was... Because it just is like, if you're smart enough to know that these cards are at the facility and to steal them, how can you be not smart enough to then how can you be the opposite and put them all on eBay, especially selling them on eBay? Because it's like, oh yeah, eBay has so many different filters now that you have to put in when you're selling cards, which that's another good thing that eBay I think has implemented over the past few years is like you really have to put in a lot of info when you're trying to sell these cards. So that way, if whatever ends up happening, if whatever pops up, and I'm sure somebody probably noticed that this card was on eBay and they're like, hey, I either own this card or I saw this card get pulled. Why is it on eBay? And then they go to the person's account and there's a ton of different superfractors on there. It really, it almost seems like, and I'm sort of a conspiracy theorist, but it almost makes so little sense of how this person would do this that it almost seems like after this past year of the quality control and all of these things with Topps, and this obviously is probably just another quality control issue where, I don't know how these cards make it out of the facility. Who is unfortunately, there's probably a bunch of people that are going to be losing their jobs either at this facility or working for Topps and Fanatics because it's like it was one person's job to destroy them. It probably was one person's job to put them aside. And then as soon as they don't get, as soon as they go missing, it's like, well, what happened here? Where is there? And there has to be footage, realistically. This is sort of the other thing with these types of facilities. There has to be cameras, and there needs to be cameras. And I actually almost wish that there was more access to some of these cameras, similar to police scanners. I almost think that there should be live camera footage of the facilities, and you can watch the people, you can watch them or something do the cards or something, because it's there's no way that there isn't unfortunate fraud and crime going on at these facilities, because it's just there are so many cards being produced and there's so many things that are happening all at the same time. It's oops, something slipped through the cracks, and that could easily be an excuse for a lot of these circumstances where a box goes missing, or a bunch of cards were sitting on a table and they accidentally get swiped off the table. I mean, there's tons of real mistakes that I think do happen at these facilities that could explain something like this. But the fact that there has to be camera footage of this somewhere, again, it's also, it's the superfractors. It's why would you, again, it's it just doesn't, some of the story is not adding up, in my opinion. How does this person that stole the cards then put them all on eBay at the same time? Puts them all up for sale. I don't know. I'm glad that Fanatics has come out and made a statement about this, and they've talked to people within the hobby who are putting out stuff about this. I'm hoping that we're going to see more. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're really. I just look at some of these situations and I'm like, how many more times can there be these massive mistakes like this before? I don't know if somebody steps in or what has to happen here, but it's why don't understand how. And it actually, if we're looking at it, it seems like it's a lot of Bowman mistakes. So it's what's going on in the Bowman department this year that really has seen the multiple superfractors out of Bowman Chrome, these Bowmans that have been kind of going crazy, the Victor Wembanyama Bowman that wasn't put into the pack or whatever, or wasn't put in the pack. I'm speculating there, but I think that's what happened because they had to come out with the whole thing and then somebody else got the first Bowman from the drawing or whatever if you had one of the number to 99s. But it's what's going on in the Bowman department? What's going on with the biggest brand? And it kind of goes back to, I forget if I mentioned it on the Hobby Hotline or if I mentioned it on this podcast. I know I did mention it on Hobby Hotline. I just don't remember if I mentioned it on this podcast. It almost feels like a lot of the resources for Bowman went into this Brady campaign, and they kind of just let the Bowman brand sort of almost. They put it in the hands or in someone. They put someone in charge who didn't know what they were doing, because the people who did know what they were doing, they were brought on to work on this Brady campaign, and it seems like they took the resources for their most important product, and they really over this past year have sort of let the QC really deteriorate to a point where it's what's going to happen next? Like, you got the next Bowman product that's going to come out early next year. Like, what's going to be the issue with that problem? It's almost like we have to start expecting these issues, massive issues. And I really don't want to, but it's like with each product, there are these massive, with each Bowman product, not even just and there have been issues with other products, maybe it's not an issue, but the Bronny James thing where that gets announced and then he's not in that product. But I hope that somebody can step in here and kind of reinvigor the Bowman product, because there's been a lot of mistakes this year, and it's one of their biggest brands, and I just don't see how Topps and Fanatics can keep letting mistakes happen to what is supposed to be their biggest product. After a sneak peek announcement, Beckett said that they were going to be doing something with ESPN, I think last week, the 14th, which the interesting thing that Beckett doesn't really do much, and I'm guessing, I don't know, maybe it's because they must not have the resources, potentially. They really are only doing like one tweet a day, which, one tweet a day doesn't necessarily equal, or tweets per day doesn't necessarily equal successful companies, but like, I don't know. I'm just not sure if they must just not have the resources to do it, because like, if you look at other accounts, you look at PSA, you look at other sports card companies, there could be more content. And I guess maybe it's like they don't want to come out with, it's not like they're a card company where they're coming out with all of these different products. But so next week, which was the 14th, Beckett announced they were going to be doing an event with ESPN Events, and they announced that they're going to be doing a pack battle on Drip Shop Live, partnered with Panini during two of the bowl games on the 21st and 22nd. It's the Armed Forces Bowl and the First Responders Bowl. And I actually was going to get on this podcast and kind of be like, Beckett's not doing anything to really solidify themselves as they're trying to get back into the top grading conversation. But then they are doing this, which I do think is interesting. And I also don't mean to pocket watch here, but Panini and Beckett are two of the biggest sports card companies in the whole industry, and they're only doing $10,000 worth of boxes. Now I get all major hits will be auctioned off post stream, with free Beckett grading, and then they have proceeds from the auctions will be going to a bunch of charities, which is great. But, I don't know. First of all, announcing it's going to be $10,000, I think, was an interesting choice. Because if you don't auction off $10,000, I guess I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure if it's $10,000 at both bowl games, or if it's $10,000 at one of them versus combined. But like, if the cards that they open don't sell, and I'll be interested. I don't know if anyone's going to do any tracking on this. I don't want to do the tracking myself. If I'm going to be completely honest, that's not really my cup of tea when it comes to following these types of events, I guess. But like, I'll be very interested if anybody does any research into this after the fact, and if they sell $10,000 worth of cards in the auctions. It's a charity thing, so I would imagine there will probably be some sort of somebody who is buying these cards, maybe from the auctions, to make sure that they hopefully hit this 10K total, because at the end of the day, if they open up these cards and they're almost, Panini is almost exposing themselves a little bit here by saying that there's going to be $10,000 worth of hobby boxes open, because all they're going to do is they're going to open up boxes, and if they don't get hits that are worth $10,000, they're going to just expose that the boxes are just bad. But at the same time, they're also are opening themselves up for criticism, because there'll be people who probably watch this, and if a crazy card gets pulled or something crazy, it's going to be like, well, Panini knows what cards are going where, like, which that's been a big criticism of Panini over the past few years with like backyard breaks and some big breakers getting like these crazy products and getting all of these crazy cards. Which also, to touch on something from yesterday's episode, Panini apparently also had a bunch of cards stolen from their facility, because if I'm not mistaken, from the reports that I saw, Topps and Panini both get their cards made at, or they get certain cards made at the same warehouse or the same company, I'm pretty sure. But, I guess the point is also, I just think, the other thing, I don't know, 2 retweets and 5 favorites on an event that you're doing with ESPN and Panini is like, there was probably a lot that was put into this for there to not be really, other than I think myself, I didn't really see, like, I have a feed of like some of the top hobby people and the hobby reporters, which I guess you could say maybe that a lot of them are reporting on the like stolen card stories. So maybe this is kind of flown under the radar a little bit, and maybe it's something that's going to pick up steam once we get closer to the bowl games potentially. And I'm hoping that we see a Panini and a Beckett marketing campaign around this. But it is kind of funny that like basically the 2 number 2s within the industry are getting together here, which if I may be mistaken, Tracy Hackman? Yeah, I know he worked at Panini, and then no, that's not correct. He worked at Panini, and then he went to the Jimmy's shop in the Rhodes store. I forget the name off the top. I forgot the full name off the top of my head, but I thought that he may have worked at both companies. But it's just, like I said, I was going to get on here and say, well, Beckett really hasn't done anything, and maybe this will be a thing that, I don't know, will help Beckett and maybe help their sales. But again, maybe that's just something that Beckett doesn't want to do. Like, maybe whoever owns Beckett, or whoever is like, the top earner in sales or whatever, looks at it and says, well, we're getting X amount of cards in, and we can only really grade X amount of cards unless we want to hire people. And then if we hire people, that's going to bring our margins down. If we continue to get RPAs in some of the higher value non-base rookie cards, which I would say that's probably Beckett's bread and butter when it comes to cards that they're grading and cards that people are sending in. Maybe they look at it and say, well, we're okay being number 2 because we don't want 1 million cards sent to us. We want 10,000 cards, but of the 10,000 cards, we're going to get high value RPAs. We're going to get high value autographs where, PSA, they're really in the volume game right now. They are in we need to grade as many cards as we can to make our margins when it comes to grading. Like, so I guess in the next few days, because it's it is, like I said at the beginning, it's the 20th, so in the next day or so, again, it's like they also have to sell these spots in these, or no, actually, I think it's a pack battle, so they're not selling spots, but in the next few days, we're going to see more info about this. Maybe someone will track it. We'll see over the next few days how this ends up going. I mean, look, I hope that it goes well, because any type of advertising and, stuff that's going on in the industry that is outside of the industry, if you're doing it with ESPN, that reflects on how the industry is doing. So if this comes out and it's a complete joke, that's going to look bad for the industry. And, as somebody who is a fan of the industry, I don't know exactly what the point I'm trying to make. I hope this goes well, because it's going to reflect well on the sports card industry if they can pull this off and, hopefully make the industry look good. So Fanatics and Fanatics Live announced that they're going to be having Dude Perfect, which is like one of the bigger YouTube channels on their platform. And it's obviously a paid partnership or whatever, but with Fanatics Live, they're going to be doing breaks and stuff along those lines. And I mean, it's not necessarily my cup of tea. Like, I'm wondering who at Fanatics maybe thought that it would drive sales, because like Dude Perfect, it's all like kids. Like, and I don't know how much of Dude Perfect's audience they share with companies they're doing brand deals with, but like, I'm sure there's probably a decent sized audience of people who are above, 10 to 15 years old, but like I would have to imagine the majority of these kids. Like I myself, I don't think I've watched a Dude Perfect video maybe since I was like 14 or 15, to be honest. And maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration because I don't know if they've been around for 10 years or 15 years at this point. But like the point is, like, I don't really care necessarily that they're doing the stuff on the platform. What I want to talk about on today's show is more just like the discourse around them being on the platform, and some of it just seems like there is a lot of like it's a really odd thing. I feel like sometimes when within sports cards there are these random like it seems sort of random, or maybe it's not, and maybe I'm misjudging the situation overall, but it seems almost random at times where there's like almost seems like the conversation really becomes very positive or negative. Like it doesn't seem like there's much in the middle there. Like, you have people who, like Collectibles Guru and Jeff Wilson, who are on the side of, like, it's a good thing. Like Collectibles Guru, for example, he tweeted that it was breaking news, which I guess I don't know. It's not really breaking news if it's like an ad campaign. Like an ad campaign isn't really breaking news necessarily. And then you have people like I was talking about, like with Mario's baseball, the card blog. I forget exactly what his full handle is, but I was talking about him earlier this week about with the stolen cards from that were the stolen superfractors that were put on eBay. Like he put out an interesting article, and I've seen other people. I think like Old Town Baseball, I think is his name. And then people like Sports Card Radio, and I mean I know I'm naming names, but that's just because these are the people that I'm seeing who are really. And if I'm going to be honest, like these are the types of names where I would imagine you would see them on opposite sides of a story. Not even just like this type of story. Like you'd see them on opposite sides of most stories for the most part. Like, and I don't think necessarily, like I said, it's another thing where it's like, I don't really care too much to be like, well, I think this person's wrong and I think this person's right. It just seems like within the hobby, there are sometimes these stories where this happens, and it seems like it's not that, it doesn't really seem like it's that big of a deal. Like, especially when, I think Sports Card Radio pointed out that, like, they weren't really getting, like, a ton of viewers on this. And, Fanatics Live, like, again, the audience of people who, it may be the audience who they're trying to get are younger collectors potentially here. And the younger collectors may not be on Fanatics Live, and that's why you don't see the audience really. But also, I think, too, there's sometimes within social media where we conflate these numbers like, oh, they only had 1,000 viewers. Like, well, we don't know necessarily what their sales were of within these 1,000 viewers. Like, and it's one of the things, it's like, Fanatics might look at it and say, well, we know that only X amount of people are going to convert, or only X amount of the audience are going to watch. So we're going to try and capture those sort of customers potentially. And, although I don't know how much they paid Dude Perfect for something like this. I mean, Dude Perfect is like one of the biggest sponsored channels like on the internet. Like I would say probably 50 to 75% of the videos that Dude Perfect does nowadays are just like, it's just sponsored content. Like they'll do car commercials, or they'll do like basketball commercials or Chipotle commercials. And it's like, sure, yeah, they are doing videos, but they're doing videos about a topic that they're getting paid to make videos about. And this is obviously, this is obvious that they're doing it this way. And sure, maybe it's something that it's involving sports and they're involved in sports, but and maybe the audience is there. Maybe this is the audience that Fanatics was looking to capture, similar to how they've been doing kind of some of these other things within the hobby, thinking that they're going to capture a different type of audience. And, unfortunately I don't know, maybe unfortunately, maybe not, but like the thing with this specific move is they're doing a show with numbers that you can see the numbers and you can see how well the show is doing, where if they put out like an Alabama product, or they put out like any type of smaller product that really is catered towards a small majority or a small minority of people who are not into sports cards, who they're trying to get into sports cards, we don't know how that did. Like, we don't know how many cases or boxes they sold. But again, it's I feel like the discourse around this is like, I don't know. It just seems like, yeah, maybe, and I think one of the things is like maybe there's people are speculating that there's people that are being paid to talk about this, and they're being paid to say good things about it. Which, again, I can think it kind of shows within the hobby that it may be a misjudgment of Fanatics to think that the hobby and people within it don't know. They aren't able to spot something. They aren't able to spot an ad, which that's sort of the one thing within social media nowadays. It's like social media just overall is it's just advertising. It's just all ads. Like, it's not, which is weird because, you think about it as a way, it's like, you think about it used to be, when there wasn't as many brands and stuff doing social media influencer advertising, you would go on Twitter, you'd go on Instagram, you'd go on TikTok or whatever during the commercials of your TV show, because it was something to escape from when the commercials were on the TV. But now you go to social media and it's commercials. So, like, I've talked about this a little bit in the past and it's not necessarily sports card related. It's more just social media in general. It's become such an odd place because it's like you have people who are making content for different audiences, but because of the way the algorithms work, all of those people are pushing their content into this funnel where anybody can see the content at any time. So it's like, you might see something, you go, wow, that's really cringe, or that's really weird. But it's like, yeah, that's because it's not like you're not part of the target audience for that video. Now, do I think that's similar to this? Like, potentially. But I think, like I said, if you are, I don't know, I go on Twitter basically now really only to find articles or topics for the show. I'm trying to use it a lot less because it's just, again, the discourse on everything. There has to be discourse on everything. Everybody has to have an opinion on everything. And I understand I'm like the pot calling the kettle black here because I have we have this podcast and I have to have an opinion and have to have conversations on the show. So it's like, yeah, maybe again, like maybe I'm calling the, whatever, the pot, the kettle black or whatever. I don't know how to say it as if I'm doing it, but I think you see what I'm saying here, where it just doesn't seem, not everybody has to have you can have an opinion on anything you want, but it just seems like we don't all need to say it online, I guess, is what my kind of point is, I guess, in a way. So, and I'll wrap up this show just by saying, like, if you're online and you're seeing this and you're just like, I don't want to engage in this, like, you don't have to. Like, that's sort of where one thing that I think can be almost an issue, I guess, within social media. It's like everybody thinks that they have to have their opinion about a thing. You can just not say anything if you don't want to. Now, this is my last tip. My last tip for the show, and I guess it's like, if you're going to complain on social media, here's my suggestion. Type the thing out that you want to complain about and then just erase it, because trust me, you get as much out of just writing it down than you would actually sending it. Because, like, again, like, I've done this at times where it feels like I just am talking into the void when I'm talking about certain things or tweeting about certain things, and it really just seems like it's a useless act of just adding, another tweet into the abyss of tweets or whatever. So, was this a good move for Fanatics to try and get customers that are younger? I mean, probably. Like, that's who Dude Perfect's audience is. So, like, the 1,000 viewers, like, and also, like, I'm sure maybe there was peaking and valleying of terms of, like, who was on the app at the time, and it's like, maybe because we're at school. I don't really know. To take the number specifically at the time and be like, well, there was this number, only this number, that may not necessarily be correct the whole time. But again, it's like, it's just, we've seen now that the numbers on social media don't always necessarily convert to sales. So, maybe that 1,000 or maybe that number that they got on Fanatics Live did end up being a good thing. Maybe it didn't. We don't really necessarily know what their sales are. We can only look at that number. We can only look at the vanity number on social media, which I think just in general is not always the best way of gauging success on doing something. Golden put out a post about the one of one Brady, from Bowman, the Bowman autograph that came out. That's already been graded, and it's actually going up for auction at Golden Auctions starting today, I think. So I know that Golden was doing some, because like Golden is partnered with PSA, and I know that they were doing. Actually, no, I think either they're partnered or they're owned. I forget off the top of my head, but they do, like, you can get cards graded by PSA and then send them directly to the Golden Vault. So, like I said, I forget off the top of my head if they're owned by the same company. I have a feeling like they might be, actually. I forget, but either way. So, Golden came out with a deal about they were doing a bunch of sales on if you were going to grade the Brady Bowman through PSA, that you could go through Golden. And then next you could get the cards graded for a cheaper price. And so like I said, this one of one gets graded by PSA, and it's going to go up for auction with Golden starting today. And it is, I don't know what the price is going to be. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the price ends up selling for. It did come back a PSA 9. So, I don't know. You could see how some modern cards nowadays, they really have to be either an 8, 9, or a 10, or it's like you really have like an insanely poor condition card. Just the way that cards are produced nowadays, they're just produced better. So you're going to get those high grades on those cards. And, obviously a Brady coming back a 9, it's a one of one. The whole thing about should you grade one of ones, that'll always be a topic of conversation. Not what I'm going to talk about on this podcast, but I'm wondering, at what point does grading have to change potentially? Like, I know that like Mike Baker Authentication does they do like grading of graded cards, but like there are just so many graded cards. Like, and grading has become so accessible. It's almost become like not like a necessity. I'm trying to think of the word. It's almost become just like part of the life cycle of a card. I forget the exact words I'm trying to say here with this concept, but the grading aspect of cards nowadays, it's like it's going to be, I think, going to get harder probably to sell raw cards, because like, what's the point of buying a raw card? Like, sure, you may be able to get it cheaper, but like you could buy like a PSA 6 or a PSA 7 or even maybe a PSA 8 for the same price as some raw cards. Like, I sold a Neymar PSA 8 2014 Prism card. Like I said, I think I've talked about this on the show. At the National, I got a bunch of 2014 World Cup Prism card Neymar cards graded, and a bunch of them came back 10, which was really great. And I think the 10s will probably pay for, if I sell all the 10s, it'll pay for all the grading, and then the 9s and the 8s, and then whatever ends up being the 4. I think I got like a 5 and a couple 6s. On the cards, but it's like these 5, 6, 7s exist, and in an 8, and the 8 that I sold was basically the same price as a raw card, which I think that almost goes to the view of that grade potentially. Like the 7 and 8 range, it really is going to come down to like if you want to buy the raw card versus if you want to buy like a card in a slab, just like in a PSA slab, like, because like I said, you can find probably lower graded ones, but even on new cards, the lower graded ones are probably more rare. So like the 4, 5, 6, those are probably just as rare as like a 10 in some cases because of what has happened to the grading. And this again, it gets me to my question of like, does the scale of grading need to change from just an overall perspective? Because like and I think people do view it this way, does a does a high grade of a modern card not matter as much? I think actually, and I'm going to say this out loud, and I think it's obvious, a high grade of a modern card doesn't matter as much as a high grade of a card that's obviously from the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Just because like I said, cards with higher grades are much easier to come by, where in the past they may not have been. So it's like if you're buying vintage, obviously a higher grade is going to cost more, but like. Then, I was talking to Danny actually the other day on Hobby Hotline, I think, last week when we were on the show, and he was saying that like he doesn't necessarily really care about the grade of a card. Like he has a good eye for what a good card looks like, so he can look at a 4 or a 5 or a 6 of a vintage card and be like, or even, and I'm kind of putting words in his mouth here. I'm thinking of an example. Maybe it's like a 3, 4, 5, and he can say, well, this card looks undergraded. It could be a much higher grade, and he's okay buying a card that's in a lower grade for a cheaper price if he can look at the card itself and say, well, it looks better than what this grade is. And like I said, with modern cards, are they going to have to almost come out with like I almost think that the modern grading of sports cards are eventually going to get different labels potentially. Like it's going to be like I don't know when they would start doing this or if they ever would. It would have to be probably the start of a year that they would do this. But I would say like I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 10 years we see a new label for modern cards specifically, like because the scale I think is actually, and if they were to do this, and like I said, I think they would have to do it in a specific year. The scale I think is just going to have to change for some of these modern cards versus even well, I know ultra modern is, I know that these time periods actually do have specific names, and I'm talking modern like, because ultra modern is like 2018 to now, I believe. So like whenever the next decade or generation of cards are considered by PSA, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a different scale being used to grade those cards. Just from the fact that like if you look at how many Luka PSA 10s there are, not all of those 10s, like in the percentage, it's like 50% of all the Luka PSA graded cards are 10s. So it's like when 50% of the cards are 10s, like you kind of have to look at it and say, well, maybe we should be adjusting the scale a little bit, because I understand that cards are made better, but I almost think that it would give the 10s more value, which, and honestly, from PSA's standpoint, they could probably charge a little bit more if they were to say, like, a 10, like, if there were only, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 or like even like a 2,000 or 3,000 Luka PSA 10s, that's obviously going to be much more valuable than there being like 20,000 PSA 10s of that Luka card. And you could look at all of those Luka cards and say not each one is going to look the same or have the same grading scale on them. Like, PSA is kind of more lenient on centering, and this is the whole thing. It's like with these modern cards and with these ultra modern cards, I just feel like we're going to have to change the scale, keep the pricing the same, change the scale, because then that's going to bring more value. Because I think over these past few years, although PSA is number one when it comes to grading, the fact that ultra modern cards are so easily graded a PSA 10 does hurt the value of that PSA 10. I don't know if it necessarily hurts the value of the PSA holder in general, but I think if they were to change the scale on some of these older or some of the newer ultra modern cards, that people would be, I don't know if it would help sales or would hurt sales, but it would help the pricing of some of these cards on the secondary market if they started grading some of these modern cards a little bit differently than they were grading, cards from, and even the like 90s and 2000s. Like if they were to come up with a harder scale on these modern cards, I think it would help the image of the PSA 10 a little bit, because now I feel like, if you grade a bunch of cards and you're not seeing a bunch of PSA 10s, you're pretty disappointed. But like in the past, I don't think it was always like that, and I think in the future it shouldn't always be like that. Like you shouldn't be able to grade 20, 30, 40, 50 cards of the same card and have like 50% of them come back a PSA 10, I think a change in scale would be good, and just an adjustment on the grading scale in general, I think would be good for PSA and grading in general.